gratitude is definitely one of the most important themes of my life. And so when I look back on my earliest days, I have nothing but gratitude for everything that happened, including the challenging stuff.
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
Good day and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Nick Hutchison. Nick stands as a visionary force behind Book Thinkers, a growing seven-figure marketing agency that seamlessly bridges the worlds of authors and readers. In just over 7 years, he has organically built a platform that reaches over 1 million people each month. Nick's podcast, Book Thinkers, Life-Changing Books, is a global top 2% show that features captivating interviews with world-class authors such as Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, and Alex Hormozi. Through the use of his platform, Nick has helped hundreds of authors expand their reach to hundreds of millions of readers and drive significant revenue growth as part of their book campaigns. His expansive services include short-form video production, podcast booking, and social media brand building. Now, Nick has dedicated his life to helping millions of readers take action on the information they learn and rise to their potential through his books, speaking, and personal brand as a whole. This was the inspiration for his new book, Rise of the Reader, where he dives into the strategies for mastering your reading habits and applying what you learn. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Nick. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
I'm excited to be here, Dwight. Thank you for the opportunity. Can I ask you the first question today?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. So you mentioned to me that you've been reading about a book a month with your busy schedule. So I'm curious, what was the best book that you read last year, since we just wrapped up 2023 at the time of this recording?
The best book I read last year would probably be a book called Brain Glue. It's actually a guest. Yeah, it's a guest that I had on my show. It actually is a book I started in December, and to be honest with you, I'm just about finished it just because of the busyness of Christmas and kids here visiting. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it. It's a marketing book where the gentleman talks about the fact that you need to use specific words in order to make it be like brain glue. And he started talking about different, things that have happened in society and things that he's been integral in helping people create marketing stuff. So it's brain glue. So he used an example of like O.J. Simpson. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, right? He used stuff like that to explain what brain glue is and why OJ got off. And then he's talked about something called Squatty Potty, which was an invention.
I have one.
Do you? Yeah. Well,
Yes.
he Squatty Potty, they originally, anyway, the interview for him actually goes live today. And he was an amazing guest. And when I interviewed him, he was one of the books that I decided if it's on Audible, I'll buy it. Right. So I started listening to it, and it was I thought, oh, this is going to be kind of foo-foo, right? Brain glue. But it actually ended up being one of the best books I listened to last year. I'd say one of the best books that I've listened to, not necessarily what people would think, would be Napoleon Hill's
Think and Grow Rich.
No, not Think and Grow Rich.
Outwitting the Devil.
Outwitting the Devil. That book blew my mind, right? Absolutely, Think and Grow Rich. It was the first book I read 30 years ago when I started my personal development, right? So, and that, the magic of thinking big, or how to win friends and influence people. Oh, fantastic books. Took me a lot of years though to get to a point where I knew how to digest the information, which is what you become a specialist in. And I'm so excited to talk to you about. But yeah, Brain Glue is making me think a lot about, because the author of that book, he's got an agency, a big agency. He actually loves the name of my brand, Give a Heck. He says, did you trip into that? Did you fall into it? How did it happen? Because he was asking me questions too. It was great, right? So what about you? What's the best book that you digested in 2023?
Oof. I went through about 100 books last year because, again, it's
Wow.
my full-time job to read and
Yeah.
implement books, right? um, so I probably have a top 4 or 5, but the first book that comes to mind was Be Useful by Arnold Schwarzenegger. So Arnold just put
Oh,
out this
wow.
brand new
Yeah.
book. He
Yeah.
does
Just
narrate the
recently.
audio.
Just
Yes.
recently. Yes. I got it on my list actually in Audible. I haven't got to it yet though.
You know what? I was going through the book and I thought, man, I could have written this, meaning every concept that he talked about resonated with me. He used the same language that I'm used to using. He talked about concepts like stoicism, a philosophy that I love. And I thought, how the heck does Arnold Schwarzenegger know about stoicism? And it was all about taking action and being useful with your life, which is, those are themes that I find myself talking about and that I'm very passionate about. So I really enjoyed the experience.
You know what book I really liked that really connected with me was Green Lights, Matthew
Matthew
McConaughey.
McConaughey. Yeah. I
That
mean, he's
book,
a
that
trained
book,
voice actor, right?
but it doesn't matter though. The trained voice actor, and yes, the music and everything they had in the audio version of it, but
Yes.
like the way his energy can come through listening to him. I don't know. I've been a fan of him, and I actually joined a mastermind with Dean Graziosi and him have a mastermind they started last year. I don't get on very often just because of that book. I didn't realize how roundabout, or how, real as life Matthew McConaughey is. I knew Dean was, right. I knew that. I've been digested books of his, but Matthew, like, wow. You'd think that he
Yeah, it
was
was so
start
good.
out rom coms to go to do what he's doing today. Like the guy's just so for me that was, I look forward to Arnold's book though, but it's good, goes to show how we put people inside of a window, right? We look at them and this is what we perceive them to be, right? So I look forward to, now that you've talked to me about it. Thank you for sharing that, because I had put it in my list. I haven't purchased it yet, but I will definitely get Arnold's book because I think he's pretty cool too. I've watched some of his biographies. He's pretty good.
Yeah, he is. And Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey is one of my favorite audiobooks of all time. And one of my
Mine
favorite
too.
takeaways from that book, you mentioned faith. I've also spent a lot of time thinking about my faith and practicing my faith. And in that book, Matthew said something where he talked about how Jesus Christ, for instance, was aligned with a purpose. And the things that benefited him the most as an individual also benefited the world around him the most. So he was aligned, like his sort of selfish acts were also great for the people around him. And I think that as a business owner, as a person, if you can get to a place where what truly fulfills you as a unique purpose also aligns with the greater good of humanity, then you're off and running. You're headed in the right direction. And I
I
thought that was
love
a really
that.
interesting takeaway. Yeah.
I love that. Well, that's exactly why, like, my book, obviously my current listeners that listen all the time know what my book is. It's Give a Heck: How to Live Life on Purpose and Not by Accident. Because I find that, as you mentioned about Matthew, if you don't find, and then talked about Jesus, if you don't have your purpose, and your purpose isn't something that's sound, and that you're always course correcting, like always analyzing, always reflecting, and making sure you're not truly servicing yourself, so how can you really service other people,
Right.
right? And that's what I found, and that's why it's part of the title of my book, because people don't live purposeful lives. They live on that hamster wheel of life: go to work, go home, get paid. They are happy it's Friday, but sad Saturday morning because they know tomorrow is Sunday and they're back to work. It's just like, that's not the life that God, like my God that I believe in, my faith. That's not what we're designed to be. We were designed to support, serve, and be better people, like throughout our lives, in my opinion, not just to sit back and be a couch potato and binge watch Netflix. I'm not cutting down people that are like that. If that's your wheelhouse and that's where they aren't listening to my show anyway. Those type of people aren't listening to my show. Those listening to my show are in my wheelhouse and understand I have no problems with taking a break on a weekend and binge watching a show with family or doing whatever. But I also have purpose to know that I can do that. I have other things outside of that that are going to keep me focused and driven and guided to serve and better myself so that I can be the best version of me to support people, because there's so many people flailing around in life today. Wouldn't you agree?
I do agree. I think that the two of us see the world through a similar lens, Dwight. So I'm excited to unpack some of these thoughts
Yes,
today.
me
And
too.
one of,
Let's get at her, brother.
yeah,
Oh, go
real
ahead.
quick,
What?
one of the things that you made me think of with the hamster wheel analogy, when I was in college, I saw a YouTube video by a spoken word poet named Sully Breaks. And I think it was titled something like Why I Hate School But Love Education, which I resonate with that title. But he said something in that video, I think, where he said, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. And I think one of the best ways to escape the rat race and play a different game, don't compete in the rat race, but to play a different game to get off the wheel, is to identify your purpose. And that's been a powerful thing for me. So I'm happy that you've written about that and that you also resonate with that message.
Oh, 100%, brother, because, I used to be that person, and it was one of the toughest chapters to write about initially in the book, being that person that lived in quiet desperation.
Mm-hmm.
How many of us do that? How many people around you today do you not even realize that they're living in quiet desperation because you have not honed? And I'm not saying specifically you, I'm just talking in general. People don't hone their conversation skills. They don't hone their ability to read body language or understand tonality. They don't literally ask good questions and then shut up and listen for the response and then realize, maybe I don't need to respond. Maybe it's just a listen thing. Maybe next time I can respond to Nick. Maybe next time I can do this. And people just don't live purposeful. They live self-absorbed. So we can live self-absorbed to grow and to better ourselves in that way, but not self-absorbed where we shut out the world and not worry about those around us, whether or not we're saying the right things. Being that wordsmith to me is something, and people go, that's strange. I work on being a wordsmith. I work on how words resonate. And when I say stuff to clients or friends, family, and I see body language, I'll say to them, did I say something wrong? And people will go, well, I've never had anybody ask me that. Well, I really want to know. I've seen your body, you stepped back a bit, you got a little tense. If I said something that offended you, and sometimes they'll say, well, no, you didn't. You just it triggered something. And then it opens up another channel of discussion because I give a heck. Right.
I
But
love
anyway.
that. Yeah, I love that. It sounds like you have honed your awareness. And by the way, reading is one of the best ways to
Oh,
improve your vocabulary, huh?
oh, absolutely. It taught me, even writing the book taught me, how I had gotten caught into these little imperfections of communication. Because when I wrote my book, my listeners don't even know, when I wrote my book, I read it out loud. So the editor would get it, they'd do some stuff, a chapter, they send it back, and I'd read it out loud. And people go, why do you do that? I said, well, have you ever heard the fact that your brain accepts things differently when it's audible versus visual? So now I'm doing visual, looking at the words and I'm reading it, and it becomes more profound. I can feel the energy in it. I'm not perfect, but I can tell how people might interpret that, reading that differently. Maybe I should change the wording. And I'd sent my first editor, we didn't get along the greatest. So they gave me a different one because I would change stuff and go, no, you changed this that I wrote it that for a reason. You may be a professional person with English language and pronunciation and, diction, etc., but I know my message. So this needs to say this way. So anyway, I'm kind of an
I did the same
person.
thing. I did the same thing with my book, Rise of the Reader. I read everything out loud because I have a very particular way of speaking and articulating things. And sometimes it doesn't translate very well to the written page. And so I had the same sort of stuff happen with my developmental editors. And they'd say, hey, you use this phrase a lot in the book. And I say, well, I love that phrase. And I think it
And that's
hammers
who
home
I
my
am.
point. So yeah,
That's
exactly. That's who I
that's my
am.
genuine Nick. This is who I am. Love me, hate
Right.
me, right? You don't have to be part of my tribe, right? You just don't. So yeah, it always it always makes me glad, right? I get this warm, fuzzy feeling like I'm feeling really glad right now when I communicate with somebody. And age to me is just a number. I have some of my closest friends that I have today that we talk about business or talk about personal development are in their 30s, dude. And I'm in my 50s, right? Why? Because I took me longer to get where they're already at, but doesn't mean that I think I'm better than them. They don't think that I'm stupider than them, whatever the case may be. We now can communicate and
Right.
resonate and have a conversation and support one another. And if there's things we totally disagree, we'll work through it. And sometimes we get to a point we agree to disagree and walk away and still be friends, right? But conversation is a dying, I honestly think it's dying art form. Right? The ability to communicate and care about what people say and realize they can Nick can have a differing opinion, but I still like Nick. He still makes me glad.
I agree. It's a dying art form, unfortunately, and especially for people my age, because I just turned 30. Again, not that age is a number. Actually, you'll think this is funny. Sometimes when people ask me how old I am, I say, I just turned 30, but if you include all of the books behind me that condense decades of somebody else's lived experience into days of consumption, if you include the 500 books behind me, I'm thousands of years old, man. And people get a good laugh at that.
Well, it's
Um,
true though, because we are a culmination of our experiences. And if your experiences have been through books, there's nothing wrong with that. It makes you constantly rethink your processes and how you analyze, and it helps you become that better critical thinker in a quicker fashion. Because the more we feed our brains, people listening or watching, the quicker we are able to come to resolution, to come to answers in split seconds. Where before, if you were just a person that never read, you really never fed your mind because your mind's a giant computer. It needs to be fed information. The more you feed it, the quicker it can analyze, the quicker it gives you resolve, the quicker it can give you peace, both on an emotional and a physical response, right? And anyway, I digress. Let's get on to the show, brother.
all right,
It's a
let's get
great,
on.
great conversation. So, Nick, I talked about before we hit record that I like focusing on the origin story, and I'm excited to hear your origin story, brother. From your earliest recollections, share what you want. You said you're an open book, so even if there's something you want to share that you've never shared with anybody else, if you feel that it'll fit now that we've developed some chemistry, share whatever. You know, you can, and if I ask you something and you want to say, well, you know what, before we go on to that part of my origin, I just want to add something here. Feel free. This is, like I said, an open book conversation. Let's just be Nick and Dwight. So
Sure.
tell
Well,
me your
it'll
origin,
be an
brother.
interesting real-time exploration, I think, for the two of us, because oftentimes you'll hear me saying that my life really started at the age of 20. Now, I'm not entirely serious when I say that, but I do feel like everything that happened in my life prior to the age of 20, it's a little fuzzy because I really woke up to the world of my potential and my awareness and my ability to have agency and control things and follow desires when I was 20. But prior to that, listen, I grew up in the perfect white picket fence household kind of scenario, the American dream. My parents were middle class, upper middle class. I was the oldest of four brothers. We had all of the health in the world. We had all of the opportunities to explore the different sports and extracurriculars that we loved. They had a second home, which they don't have anymore. It was a small beach cottage. And so we would spend our summers at the beach, and it was amazing. I mean, it really was. And although I did have some anxiety around public speaking and things like that, that I had developed probably from like early middle school through my college experience, outside of that, it was as beautiful as it could be. And I give a lot of credit to my parents, because sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, when I'm a dad, I'm going to change this, this, and this, which is not uncommon. I think that is common. But for me, my wife and I, we got married this year, and when I think about starting a
Congratulations.
family, I really want to, yeah, thank you. Or last year, I should say, I really want to replicate a lot of what they provided to us, which was comfort, it was peace, it was opportunity, it was freedom. So my earliest memories are probably at my beach house. Those are the ones that come to mind first. the beach house the beach cottage that my parents had. And there was a little pool in the backyard, and the beach was only about a 2-minute walk. And we'd go to the beach every day during the summers. My parents would take weeks off at a time, and we'd go build sand castles and play in the ocean. And there was an arcade down the street. And I think a lot of my earliest memories are from that sort of time period.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I like how you talked about, many things. And I think we all have that learned pattern social behavior where we want that, white picket fence. We want that. We want everything that we want. We look outside and see the Smiths or the Joneses or the person up the street. They have all this stuff. And really, when you dial it down, your parents gave that to you with a beach house and a few weeks they took. I was the same way. My kids are all adults now, and I took every single summer off. I would service my clients if stuff come up, but I would not take any new business on come June so that it would be wrapped up by July so I could have the summer to spend with my kids to create those memories. So your parents gifted you something that now you've taken into your adult life, which is a gift that you never can repay. All you can do is be grateful that they did that, because they taught you that family is important, that memories are important. And you talk about the local arcade. I think about as my kids, see, my dad was a workaholic. So I didn't see him in the summer. This type of business he had, there's no way he could shut down in the summer. But I had escapism in the fact that I like going to the local arcade. I liked going for bike rides. I like doing different things outside. And you're talking about nature, which is a great thing. And I like how you said, when I'm a dad, I'm going to do that. I hear that all the time too. 21 years of dealing with people, life coaching and doing their finance and their insurance stuff and just helping them understand their lives. They sit and they complain about life. And you can I want to hear what you think about this. They complain about their lives, their childhood. And I'll look at them and ask them a very simple question. Can you tell me something that you're grateful about from your childhood? And it's dumbfounding how people just sit back and their eyes get wider and they're just like, what? I never thought about that. Well, you're telling me all this stuff and I understand. I can appreciate the pain and suffering that you went through. I don't say that you believe, because it is their reality of what they believe. It might not even have been that. It could have been something else that traumatized them. And I'll ask them, what are you grateful for? And they struggle because nobody's ever challenged them. And sometimes when I ask that question, everything was terrible. Well, it also sets the stage of what kind of relationship they are going to have with me, because they have a very negative mindset. So what are you thinking about that in regards to how people are pattern taught and stuck in the fact of not being grateful from a young age, and then they drag that into their adulthood?
Well, I see it happen all the time as well. I've read that as you're growing up, as the average North American kid is growing up, they hear no 8 times for every time they hear yes. So you're at the grocery store with your parents. No, you can't have that. Put that down. No, we're not eating this. No, you can't have that for dinner. 8 no's for every yes. And so I think that in our society, it is common to go without, right? A feeling of lack, as compared to gratitude, which is a feeling of have, right? There's no desire outside of what you're currently looking at. You're in the present moment and you're happy with it. And I do think that pattern pervades a lot of society today. Now, when I started my reading journey, one of the key things that I found in the books I was reading at the age of 20 was this theme of gratitude. And so very early into my reading experience, I started to journal 3 things that I was grateful for every single day. And at first it would just be 3 bullet points. And then eventually it evolved into 3 paragraphs. And within maybe 6 months, 12 months of starting this daily practice, I would look for things throughout my daily experience to be grateful for, so that the next day I could write them in my journal. And so I was filtering for opportunities to be grateful, because it became a habit, a routine, a practice. And it mattered so much to me. And I noticed such a big change from victim to hero, from no control to complete and total agency, that I actually got the numbers 1, 2, and 3 tattooed on my left wrist, so that thousands of times per day, maybe more, I don't know, consciously, unconsciously, I see this gratitude tattoo, and I'm reminded that gratitude is the lens that I should view everything through. On the back of my wrist, I have agradecido, which is gratitude tattooed in Spanish. I got this during a month-long trip in Panama. And I mean, I could continue to talk about gratitude. My group chat for my company in Slack, it's our internal communication tool. We have a daily gratitude channel where everybody on our team writes 3 things they're grateful for. I record a gratitude time capsule at the end of the week, and I upload it to a drive so I can condense an entire year's worth of gratitude into an hour. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but gratitude is definitely one of the most important themes of my life. And so when I look back on my earliest days, I have nothing but gratitude for everything that happened, including the challenging stuff.
Wow. People that are listening to that, rewind a few minutes and listen to Nick say that again, because gratefulness is something that we have to work at. But you eventually get to a point where, like you mentioned, Nick, it just becomes second nature. You look for it. I'm the same way. I wish I would have had that at your age, but at my age today, I've been doing this for a long time. I go to bed with gratitude. I get up with gratitude. I perform gratefulness exercises. I don't write it out specifically like you. I think about it. I talk it out loud, depending on what the circumstance is. And I literally look at my day, and I'll, yesterday, for an example, so last night I'm laying in bed doing my gratefulness exercise, and I literally break down from the moment I'm grateful I woke up. I'm grateful that I was given another shot, another opportunity to serve myself so I can serve others better. I'm grateful that I have, and I go through this list of things, and some people will laugh when they ask me, well, tell me what was your day like yesterday? And I'll tell them, well, I had a great podcast interview, for an example, and the guest really made me feel good. I resonated. I got off the show and it made me think differently. And I just appreciated that person investing their time in my life. And I talk about that sort of stuff. I'm grateful that, I got to see one of my grandkids on FaceTime. I'm grateful that, I was able to have a meal with one of my kids today because they were over, just stuff like that. And I'll go, how does that help? Well, it makes me feel glad because it makes me appreciation that I was given things, another shot, another opportunity to have a memory that I can live forever. So you encapsulate all your stuff, as you were mentioning, which is fabulous because you could literally go back into that time capsule of the year and all that's going to wash over you again. People don't realize that. So that would be something that I think would be excellent to add into my own daily regime,
Yes.
right? And my
Yeah,
yearly
let me
regime,
give you a little bit
because
more.
yes,
go ahead.
please do. Context, yes.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit more structure for it. So, by the way, A Rise of the Reader, my book, the back half, I include over 100 healthy, wealthy, and happy habits that people can implement. One of those is recording a weekly gratitude time capsule. So here's what I do. I pull out my phone, selfie mode, and I record up to 60 seconds, just highlighting the best things that happened in my week. So I'll start like this. Today is Sunday, January 7th, and here's what I'm grateful for the last week. And then I'll just talk to the camera. I upload that up to 60-second video to a Google Drive. It's categorized by year. And so you can condense an entire year's worth of videos into under 52 minutes. So you could see an entire year's worth of gratitude. Yeah, it's so cool.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for that, because, I look back on doing selfie and recording is second nature to me. And, we talked about earlier about, I believe it was before we started recording, about being a podcast guest. I took it serious before I ever started my podcast, and I went through a podcast school to learn how to be a proper guest, how to, bring the proper energy and just stuff like that. And people go, well, you're pretty good conversationalist prior. Yeah, but I always can get better. I always can up my game and do that climb. So I literally, during the pandemic, was challenged to do daily videos, and 837 days later, I stopped doing live videos. I did a live video every single day. I'm serious. And do you believe you go start at day one and you look 100 days later, 200, up to 800, how much it evolved and helped me be that person that I'm comfortable. So those listening, with what Nick's saying, to record that time capsule, it may seem uncomfortable at first, But you know what? It's like anything. When you first learned to ride a bike, you practice and got better. You're wobbly, and then all of a sudden now you're a baller and you can just give her, and and that's the way it is with doing videos. So I love that suggestion. It won't be hard for me to adapt to do a minute video every single day. And so you say you encapsulate it down to, how do you do that process? And so if you record it up to a Google Drive and you've done a video for 365 days, how do you do that?
So I only do one video per week.
Oh, one
I
video per
record
week.
my
Sorry,
gratitude
I
every
apologize.
day. I
You
write it
record-
out
okay,
every day.
I got it mixed up. I apologize.
But every Sunday I record just a 1 minute video.
Just the one video. And then, so the daily one is what you record. So listeners, I apologize. So he records, you do up to 3 paragraphs, you said, a day?
Yes. Yep.
Yes, 3 paragraphs a day. So we're clear. We don't want to give misinformation. And then once a week on Sundays, you do that. And that's how you end up with 52 minutes. I apologize.
Yes.
I got
Perfect,
ahead of myself.
perfect.
I was excited the fact that you do this stuff, right? And sometimes we get a little bit of mind salad, a little bit of mixed up stuff that goes on. But thank you for articulating that.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah,
and I'll share one other thing
Sure.
related to gratitude, because this is a very important quote for me. It comes from a great book, kind of a sleeper book, one that people don't talk about very much, called Life's Amazing Secrets by an Indian monk named Gaur Gopal Das. And he has this amazing quote, and I just stopped dead in my tracks when I read it. He says, "It's not happy people that are grateful. It's grateful people that are happy." So gratitude is the input, not the output. It's the input. You have to focus on gratitude. Happiness is the lag indicator. It's the output. So gratitude's an action. Happiness is the feeling that comes from the action of practicing gratitude. And so journaling 3 things every day, speaking it out loud like you do, recording your time capsule, those are actions that you can implement, habits that you can adopt. And then the happiness, like the feeling of gratitude, that comes as a result of practicing.
Yeah, I love that lag indicator. I haven't heard that terminology in a long time.
Lead and lag, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I literally, prior to getting into finance, electronics engineering, so I worked a lot and with lead and lag time and stuff, right, in regards to design and development. But anyway, that being said, one of the things I'd like to ask you too, because you've read, like you said, 100 books in the last year. And this might be tough for you, but I personally want to know, what would be your top 3 books since you started reading, and why?
Well, the first book that I ever read is the reason that I continue to read. So by default, it gets the credit, I think, for pick number 1 here. That was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And that book starts a lot of reading journeys, I think, for a number of reasons. Right in the beginning of the book, Robert Kiyosaki, the author, he says that money as a subject, it's not a subject that's taught in school, in the public education system. So where does it get taught? It gets taught at home. That means that if you grow up in a poor or middle-class family, you're going to learn poor or middle-class money habits, right? It's a language, financial literacy. So no wonder people get stuck in that cycle, that rat race, spinning the hamster wheel like we talked about. Because if you just observe what your parents are doing and they have poor middle-class money habits, you're going to reciprocate, right? These habits are caught, not taught. So you catch their behavior and then you replicate. Whereas rich kids, they grow up in rich families and they learn rich money habits. So how do you break the cycle? How do you get out of the hamster wheel? Well, you have to self-educate. You have to read books written by rich people, and you have to start to understand how they view money from their perspective. So all of that blew my mind. I mean, at the time, I was a business student in college, and I didn't know much about money. So I had a lot of insecurity around the subject of money. Now, given my parents, middle class, upper middle class, they did great, but we didn't talk about money. And I think that's the case for probably most people listening today. And so I started reading these books, and I went back to school my senior year after reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad and a few other books on financial literacy. And I was leading those conversations. And so I just started to think, man, if I can remove an insecurity and actually build an area of confidence for $20 in a few hours of my time, what other areas of my life can I apply this magical sauce to? So that's kind of how I got hooked on reading and why I love that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, so much.
Well, that book's amazing. My first experience with Rich Dad Poor Dad, and this is going to date me, would be in the early I'd say about maybe 2002, 2003. I had a friend lend me his CD set of the book, right?
Yeah.
And so prior to Audible, stuff like that. And I had to drive, I had a bunch of business to do with, had to drive around the province where I live in Alberta. And I was going to be driving probably around 12, 13 hours. And I started plugging those CDs. And that was my first experience with it. Wasn't the physical book, though I owned it. I had gotten it. I just so busy, couldn't get, I was raising my kids and I ended up getting this CD, and that was the best gift. That person I don't even talk to anymore that lent it to me, right? And when I went to give it back to him, he told me to keep it, and I still have it, right? It's
Yeah.
What a powerful book, though, right?
Yeah, it
Robert
really
Kiyosaki,
is.
right? He's an amazing gentleman. He's helped a lot of people. Well, there's so many good books out there. You look at Jack Canfield. You look at all the different authors. Look at Cubby, right? The list goes on. There's such a plethora of knowledge out there to help you and I out. And knowing that first book for you that really resonated with you was The Rich Dad Poor Dad, when really at the end of the day, it was for me too. Now, physical books, in 1993, 30 years ago, I got handed 3 books by a mentor of mine. He's still a mentor of mine 30 some years later, right? He gave me Magic of Thinking Big, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Think and Grow Rich,
3
right?
great books. Yes.
And I couldn't get enough of them. Then it was the 5 love languages. Then it was Og Mandino, right? Greatest Salesman. And I became like a sponge. I couldn't get enough. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is the process of all that reading that I did. I didn't know how to take all that information, because really, I believe, and I've read about it, where when we read something or hear something, we're what, 10, 15% retention if we're lucky. How do you utilize all this knowledge, and what have you learned in your years of reading to make it so that people get the most actionable information out of that book and continue
Right.
to learn from it and grow from it?
Well, I am obsessed with this subject, but you did ask me to give 3
Oh,
recommendations, my
sorry,
3
go
all-time
ahead.
favorite
Yeah,
books.
yes, you
So
sure
I'll
did.
just kind
I
of
sure
rattle
did,
off
pardon
the
me.
other 2, and then I'll get
Okay.
into this one, because I didn't want the listener to be like, what the heck? I only got 1. All right, so here are the other 2 books that have probably had the biggest impact on me. And that's the lens through which I answer my favorite books, right? The ones that have created the most behavior change. Number 2 for me was The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss.
Good
So when
book.
I read that book, I was a recent college graduate. I had been reading for about a year. And in the subtitle of that book, he says something like escape 9 to 5 and design your dream life. And so I was working a 9 to 5 sales job, and I started to apply some of the philosophies in that book to make that same job a remote position. And then as I started to travel the world and experience new things and build out my side hustle, which became Book Thinkers, my agency, I started to apply a lot of the time management and business management philosophies in the 4-Hour Workweek directly to my business. So he talks about auditing your time. If something is low impact and it can be easily outsourced, well, get rid of it, get it off your plate so that you can focus on higher impact or more leveraged activities. So I love that book. And then the third one that I'll mention is $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozy. So that book took my agency from $10,000 a month to $30,000, $40,000 a month within a couple of months. So you want to talk about a return on investment from a book. All I did was go through the exercises in his book, restructure my offers, put together some bigger deal structures, start presenting them, and voila, my business tripled, quadrupled on a monthly revenue basis after reading that book almost instantly. And that's the power of a book, man. That's how fast it can happen. And to kind of tie a bow on all of this, why are these books my favorite? Because they created the most action. And how do we take better action from books? I believe that's the next question, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's something that, like people, I go into their homes or I've been to families like my own family and they got all these books and I'll say, "What's your favorite book?" "Oh, I haven't even read them." Well, a great way to hide knowledge. Don't open the cover, right?
Yeah,
Don't
true.
actually put in the energy to realize. And growing up, I was not a big reader. My sisters were, but I was not a big reader. And people will look at me today, well, how did you develop that? Oh, I just opened up the book and removed all doubt. I started reading and I started thinking about what I was learning and putting value to that. And that, putting myself out of the circumstance of thinking that, I know it all. Or what is that person going to teach me? Or you get people that'll say, well, I'm not going to read that person's making a ton of money off of me and blah blah blah. When in reality, most book authors, like you said, don't make squat, right? It's
Right.
utilized as a tool to help out their other revenue generating businesses. But so yes, please get into this next phase of this conversation of how does a person ensure that they get the best value? Like you talked about Alex's book and literally going through their exercises and how it made a difference. Obviously, that's something a person can do. Obviously, there has to be other things, though, that a person can utilize in a book that doesn't necessarily have structure like Alex's would have.
Yes, and I have dozens of recommendations, but I'll give kind of an entry level example. And for people again that are interested, there could be a deeper dive in Rise of the Reader because this is the problem I'm out here trying to solve. So let's say that I was planning on reading Give a Heck, How to Live Life on Purpose and Not by Accident. Because the book was gifted to me, a mentor said, hey, you should check this out. Maybe I'm struggling with purpose and I'd like to solve that problem. There could be a whole host of reasons why I end up with the book in my hands. And I read the front cover, I read the back cover, maybe I read your bio. Dwight, I get to know a little bit more about you. And then here's where the magic starts to happen. I set a SMART goal for each book that I read. So for anybody that's not familiar with it, SMART is a goal setting acronym that stands for specific. So your goal needs to be specific. M stands for measurable. You need to set a measurable goal so that you know whether or not you've achieved what you're setting out to accomplish. The legendary management guru, Peter Drucker, he would say, what's not being measured can't be managed. You need to measure your goal for the book. And that's where I think a lot of people are missing out. A stands for attainable. So your goal needs to be realistic. Otherwise, you'll get overwhelmed and you won't take action. So baby steps here, set an attainable goal, something that's realistic. R stands for relevant. You want to be emotionally connected to the goal that you're setting. It will encourage you to stick with the book and take action. So R, relevance, emotional connection. And T is time bound. You want to give yourself a deadline to take action. So if I was setting a SMART goal for this book, I would say, I'm looking to find and implement at least 2 strategies to be more purposeful in my life and my business by the end of January. So that's specific. I know what the goal is. It's measurable. Did you find and implement at least 2 ways to be more purposeful in your life and business? It's attainable. I didn't say like define my purpose and get it tattooed on me. I just said find and implement 2 ways to be more purposeful. Am I emotionally connected to it? Of course I am. Purpose is everything. And I gave myself a deadline by the end of January. So here's where it gets fun. Write the intention on the inside cover of the book that you're reading. Write it down or on a sticky note or in the notes section of your phone if you're going to listen to it. And review it every time you go through another chapter. Refresh your intention for the book, that SMART goal. Because our brains have this reticular activating system, right? The RAS, it's our natural filter. And so you want to share your goal with the book so that the book can share just the most important information, right? Those actions that you can implement to put more purpose into your life and business. They'll jump off the page if you tell your brain exactly what you're looking to implement. And then at the end of the reading process, you might have 10 potential actions that you could implement. And so do a quick 80-20 analysis. What 20% of these can drive 80% of the change that I'm looking for? Not every action is created equal. That's why I recommend finishing an entire book before you choose to implement, because life is short. You can only implement so much. And I think that small steps in the right direction, that's where all the magic is made. So that's one of the dozens of things that I recommend that people do, but start with a SMART goal and watch some amazing things start to happen.
I have a whole chapter in my book on SMART.
Oh, I love that. I love
I
that.
do. Yeah. And I've had many people reach out. A guy I finally did meet at a conference a year and a half ago, he comes up to me, and I'd been on some mastermind calls and stuff, and he come up and shook my hand. He says, because of your book, he says, my wife and I moved across the country. I started my own business. And I said, so what was the most impactful chapter in the book? He says, the process of how easily you broke down how to do SMART goals. He says, it
Oh, I
made a
love it.
huge impact and driver in my life, because my book it's only like 150 pages. It's not very big. It was designed to make it so that people would think, not necessarily give them all the answers, because I want people to put effort, right? I want them
Mhm.
to actually, because you can spell everything out. So when you were talking about it, the reason I was smiling is that great way to explain it, though. You did a great job. But yeah, those listening, listen to that part again of we'll just listen to the whole podcast more than once, and it'll change your life, right? But
It's a simple thing though, right? Like
it
apply the
really is.
SMART goal framework to the books you're reading, but most people don't do it, right? You just jump in and you hope the book's going to change your life. And it's like, I mean, I learned after trial and error that just doesn't happen. Like, you might find something life-changing, but if you search for something life-changing with more intention and definition and specificity, like it's more likely that you're going to find it.
Well, and that's exactly it. How to live a purposeful life. And part of that chapter isn't specific about setting goals up for your financial life. The whole book is designed, it talks a little bit about budgeting, goal setting, obviously, because of the chapter on SMART, but it's about the fact that you should be setting SMART goals for everything in your life. So if I'm sitting with somebody and they tell me that they want all this stuff for their immediate family, they want this for retirement, they want this for estate planning, and I'm going, okay, that's great. Now let's figure out the goals of how we're going to accomplish that. Well, why? I've told you what I want. Well, no, it's not just simple as writing down, I want a brand new car. It's not that, you know what I mean? But
Yes.
back to what we talked about, like Robert Kiyosaki talked about, we're not educated in school about not just finance. We're not educated about how to goal set. We're not educated about how to live a purposeful life once we hit that level of our life where we're the majority, and now we have to go out and get a job, or we go out and start our business as an entrepreneur or whatever. Goal setting was one of the weakest things that I had in my life in my early 20s with my first business, because I'm a serial entrepreneur, to a point where one of the books that impacted me too, that helped me out a lot, was the 12-week year. All right. That
Oh,
was
I
another
love
good
that
book,
book.
right? I've listened to that book. I've read it. I belonged to a mastermind for a couple of years that all we did was focus on the 12-week year. And again, back to that, getting all that information. Did I learn everything I possibly could from the 12-week year? Or, you talked about the 4-hour work week. No, I could probably go back and learn even more. Do you ever go back to books that you've learned from and have those reoccurring ones that you constantly listen to or read?
Absolutely. When I look at the 500 plus books I've read, I'd say 5% of them have created 95% of the change. And those are books that I constantly revisit. Sometimes I'll read a book 6, 7, 8 times. And I'm sure by the end of my life, maybe I'll have read some of those books 100 times. Now, I'd argue, though, that you can never read the same book twice, right? Because you're a different person and you're reading through a different lens every time you pick it up. And so sometimes I'll reread a book and I'll go, how the heck did I miss this? Well, I didn't see it. I wasn't filtering for it with my SMART goal at the time. And so I bypassed it and it wasn't relevant to me. And now it is. And so, yeah, I definitely have favorite authors and favorite books. And those three that I just mentioned, I've read multiple times. I've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad 7, 8 times already. And the 4-hour work week 4 or 5 times probably. $100 million offers I've only read 1.5 times so far, but I'm sure I'll constantly revisit it.
Well, it hasn't been out that long either, but that's pretty good that you've gotten through that. So I appreciate you sharing. I want to touch a little bit though too on your podcast, right? Your Book Thinkers Life-Changing Books is a global top-ranked show, and we mentioned it's featured interviews from world-class authors such as Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, and Alex Hormozy. I've seen them all speak. I've Lewis, I've been to a couple of his events in Columbus, and he's amazing, right? His latest book actually was a book that I listened to this past year in 2023, right? Good
The
book.
greatness mindset. Yeah.
Yeah. And his podcast, his one that he brought out about 2 years ago, where it's just snippets of his main podcast. I try to catch that because it's easy to digest. 15 minutes. It's just like, if you can't afford 15 minutes to better yourself or your mindset or to increase your thought process, there's something that you need to work on. Give yourself, invest in yourself. So what has been the most impactful guest you've had onto your podcast today, and why?
Stephen Pressfield has been the most impactful guest. We've had him on 2 or 3 times already, and he's an amazing guy. He's probably best known for The War of Art. That's his most famous nonfiction book. And then he has a few famous fiction books as well: Gates of Fire, The Legend of Bagger Vance, etc. And we filmed a podcast with him at his home last year in Malibu. Funny enough, on the same day that we filmed in Lewis's studio. So it was a big day for us. And at the time of recording, Stephen was 79 years old. And the reason that it was so impactful for me is because we were going through a book that he had just released called Government Cheese. It was sort of a memoir, the man behind the scenes. And he talked about working from the ages of 20, essentially until his mid-50s, with no success, never being paid for any of his writing, working odd jobs, driving trucks, picking fruit, oil rigs, and everything in between, just trying to make ends meet so that he could afford time to write. And I was sitting there thinking, my generation, late 20s, early 30s, it's all instant gratification. Nobody's willing to sacrifice decades of their life in order to achieve anything of meaning. But I look at how much fulfillment he has, genuine fulfillment. And he sits there and he says, you know what, Nick? I was just looking to score one time in my entire life, get the ball into the net one time. And I did. And I worked at it for 30 years. And now he's had, many scoring situations, books that have sold millions of copies, etc. But I just admire somebody who can overcome resistance and delay gratification and focus on impact at the expense of almost everything else in their life. And that's admirable to me, So after that conversation, and I made a lot of changes in my business. I started to become a little bit more risk tolerant, think bigger, the David Schwartz book, Magic of Thinking Big. And yeah, it was that podcast interview that I think helped build a lot of the momentum that I'm feeling today. So I owe a lot to Stephen for that conversation.
That's awesome though. And those listening or watching, don't think that a person can't change your life. One person. You need to be receptive and open-minded to it. And look what it's done for Nick, and how it, like you said, it made you think differently. It made you become more risk tolerant, because at the end of the day, those listening or watching, you will never, ever be successful if you aren't willing to step outside of your comfort zone. Now, if life in your comfort zone is where you want to live, and you can truly look at yourself in the mirror and say, I'm happy, good, stay there. But most of you that listen to my show, you're wanting to grow, you're wanting to expand. Maybe you're already at a level of success, but you want to continue on the climb, right? You need to be outside of your comfort zone. You need to have that risk tolerance that Nick just mentioned. So that's amazing that one interview, obviously on the same day of Lewis Howes, that's amazing as well. Like that's like a 1-2 punch. Like that's just awesome. Congratulations on that. So Nick, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about too was so many people devalue what 15 minutes or even 5 minutes a day can do for their personal development, right? You educate people how to become more successful problem solvers and transform their life via your business, via your book. But how does a person truly utilize 15 minutes a day to train themselves to be effective?
It's a great question. Sometimes the reason that I talk so much about 15 minutes is because it's an attainable period of time. If I said read for 5 hours a day, people go, that's not realistic. But what is realistic is 15 minutes. And the proof is in the pudding. Everybody listening today or watching, pull out your phone, go to the amount of time that you're spending, screen time every day, and look at how much time you spend on some of these apps. It's mind-blowing. So I'll kind of jokingly start like this. I'll say, oh, you don't have time to read? What if I paid you $10,000, US or Canadian, to read a book by the end of the month? Do you think you could do it? And that same person who just told me they didn't have time to read, they go, yeah, of course, I could read 5, right? So they've fallen into my trap. It's not a question of whether or not we can read. It's a question of whether or not we value reading enough to prioritize it over some of those other things that we see in our screen time, right? If you've got it pulled up in front of you. It's always surprising to see how much time I spend on my phone. So instead of trying to find time, because most of us already use all 24 hours every single day, we have to replace a low impact activity, meaning something that's mostly meaningless in the long term, with something that can create change, like reading a great book. So just swap 15 minutes in the morning of your Instagram scrolling, not all of it, but just the first 15 minutes with reading a great book, or maybe the first 15 minutes of your Netflix in the evening. Not all of it. Again, I'm not a robot, just like you're not a robot, Dwight, but replace a little bit of it, 15 minutes a day, with reading a great book, and watch how fast your life can change. Because in 15 minutes, somebody who's just starting out, they might read about 10 pages. Well, 10 pages Monday through Friday, that's 50 pages a week. Most of these books are 200 pages or less. You mentioned yours is 150. So following the formula of 15 minutes a day, 5 days a week, you could finish Dwight's book in 3 weeks. That's pretty amazing, right? 50 pages a week. So that's what I think 15 minutes can do for people. It can change everything just by replacing a little bit of Netflix, social media with reading a great book.
Yeah, I like how you put that. It reminds me of a person that I admire. Some of what he stands for is Andy Frisella and his 75 Hard. If you've ever heard of
I'm
his
on day 37 right now. It's my third time
okay.
through.
Well,
Yeah.
I've met Andy. I was part of RTA for many years. I recently left the organization just because of time constraints. But like, I know Ed Milet. I've known him for first seen Ed speak probably 30 years ago. Andy, I just got involved with what he represents because of the RTA syndicate. But yeah, 75 Hard is, again, part of that process is reading 10 pages a day, right? So as you mentioned, like 15 minutes. And when you said that, that Andy popped into my head, because his process, his program is more about mental toughness than people think it's about physical, right? You get both out of it, but it's meant to challenge you on the 6 inches between your ears. So I appreciate you saying that. I like the fact, I'll give you $10,000. Will you read a book now? All right. It's that carrot on a stick. Here you go. Now will you read?
Yeah.
Right? Then that's what people need to think. What those little baby steps. So that 15 minutes a day, taking out the Netflix, taking out the scrolling on the phone, 15 minutes, you owe it to yourself. You owe it to your, even if you don't have a family yet, you're an individual dude, you have parents, you might have siblings, you owe it to them to better your life. Maybe they're counting on you to be that success so that they can ride your coattails. And that's okay too, because you can bring along people along your journey, because along the journey, if they're following your coattails, they're learning, they're growing, they're taking baby steps. So it's all how we think about stuff. And I really appreciate that. Nick, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Well, I'd say you only have one life, so give a heck about it. Live a great life. Don't end up living with regrets. One of my favorite books of all time is The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware. She's an end-of-life palliative care nurse. She'd spend the last couple of days, maybe weeks, with somebody as they transitioned out of this life and onto the next. And she'd spent a lot of time talking with these people, and she realized that most people live with a lot of regret. And the number one regret is that people didn't live lives based on their own expectations of a good life. They lived their lives based on other people's expectations of them. And as a result, they ended up regretting not having gone for that business idea, or, had children when they knew they really wanted them, but were scared, or whatever the case is. So that's my message: is there's a book to solve every problem. Start solving problems, building skills, living up to your potential, because it's so much more fulfilling. And regret is poison and it weighs a lot on you as you age. And I try to avoid regret at all costs. So that's my message: is there's a book to solve every problem. Life doesn't have to be so hard. You can be truly fulfilled. You can live with purpose, just like you talk about, and you should give a heck about your life and stop sitting there scrolling for 5 hours a day on social media and watching Netflix shows. Like, go out and do something of value and be of service to people.
No, I love that. We talk about people today, they sit and they want, but yet they're not willing to sacrifice even 15 minutes. They're not willing to move forward in their lives and do the things that will help them become the great person that they deserve to be, like Lewis's House, School of Greatness, right? Just, you have to put the effort in. So I appreciate that. Our time is almost up. I want to respect our listeners and your time. However, before we end, can you please tell the listeners what's the best way to reach you, Nick?
Well, if anybody wants a custom book recommendation from me, it's one of my favorite things to do, is sort of play this like book matchmaker role. So if anybody wants a custom recommendation from me, direct message me on Instagram at Book Thinkers, spelled just like it sounds, Book Thinkers. And tell me about a problem you're facing or a skill that you want to develop, and I will provide a custom book recommendation to you and follow up with you in 30 or 60 days to see what you've thought of the book. So from there, you can find links in our bio to everything else, including Rise of the Reader, but that's the best place to go.
And I was going to ask you about a recommendation for me, but I don't need to, because I mentioned to you in the message that I sent back to you last night after doing more research on you, and finding out now that your book's actually available on Audible is exciting for me. And it's in my list to purchase, because I think I will learn a lot from it. So that would be the first recommendation that you told me without telling me.
All right, good. Yes. And I did read it myself. So if you don't hate my voice, then it will be a good fit for you. If you've made it this far and you hate my voice, good for you. But maybe the audiobook wouldn't be the best format.
Yeah, probably not. Excuse me. I think your voice is fine. I'm looking forward to it. So any last words before I wrap up the show?
No, I'm excited. Thank you again for the opportunity, Dwight, and I'm grateful for you.
Yeah, I'm grateful for you too, brother. Things happen for us, not to us. And this has happened for both of us, and to the listeners and viewers as well. So thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Nick. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn. It is never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.